Hello, curious minds. Welcome back to our channel. I am Dr. Byte, your guide in this incredible world of science and curiosities. Today I have brought you a super interesting topic. Did you know that there are situations where we are in motion but not accelerating? That's right. Sometimes we are moving but the speed at which we move doesn't change. This is essential for understanding not only physics but also our daily lives. In today's video we will explore this fascinating concept of acceleration. What is it? How can we recognize it in different situations? And most importantly, how does it apply to our everyday lives? Get ready because we will analyze practical examples that will help you understand why we are not always accelerating, even when it seems like we are in motion. So, grab your notes, fasten your seatbelts, and let's dive in. Welcome to our first segment, where we will demystify the concept of acceleration. To start, we need to understand that acceleration is the rate of change of an object's velocity over time. In simple terms, if an object changes its velocity, whether increasing, decreasing, or even changing direction, we say that it is accelerating. Now take a look at this graph. Here, the blue line represents an object that is accelerating, while the orange line shows an object in uniform motion, maintaining the same speed. The slope of the blue line indicates that the object's velocity is increasing. The steeper the line, the greater the acceleration. On the other hand, if an object's speed remains constant, like this car moving at 60 km per hour, there is no acceleration. This may seem contradictory since we are indeed in motion. But the key here is that acceleration does not only refer to motion but to changes in speed. To understand better, let's look at the formula for acceleration. Acceleration equals the change in velocity divided by the time it takes for that change to occur. For example, if a car goes from 0 to 100 km per hour in 5 seconds, we can calculate the acceleration by dividing the change in velocity, which is 100 km per hour, by the time, which is 5 seconds. This gives us an acceleration of 20 km per hour per second. Let's begin with a clear and practical example. Imagine a car traveling in a straight line at a constant speed of 60 km per hour. The important thing here is that this car maintains that speed consistently, meaning it is neither accelerating nor decelerating. Therefore, we can conclude that the acceleration is zero in this scenario. This situation allows us to understand a fundamental concept in physics. Acceleration is, by definition, the rate of change of an object's velocity over time. When the velocity remains unchanged, as in the case of our car, we are witnessing uniform motion. It is a situation that may seem simple, but it is essential for our understanding of how motion works. Now, why is it crucial to understand this difference? In everyday life, we often find ourselves in situations where we are in motion, such as during a trip or even while walking. It is vital to recognize that even when in motion, if the speed is not changing, we are not experiencing acceleration. This distinction helps us interpret better the physical phenomena that occur around us. In the next part, we will explore other situations where acceleration can manifest, even if it might not seem like there is any motion at first glance. Get ready to dive even deeper into this fascinating world of physics. Stay tuned. Now that we've understood what acceleration is, let's take a look at a situation where there is no movement, and therefore no acceleration. Think about the example of a book resting on a table. Simple, right? The book is completely still, it's not moving in any direction, and as a result, the acceleration is zero. In this case, what we have is a body at rest, and this is a perfect example of a fundamental concept in physics called inertia. Inertia is the tendency of an object to resist any change in its state of motion or rest. If the book is stationary, it will remain stationary unless acted upon by an external force. And since no force is being applied to it at this moment, it stays at rest. What's interesting here is that even though the book is at rest, forces are still acting on it. For example, gravity is pulling the book downward. However, the table exerts an equal and opposite force, called the normal force, which balances the gravitational force, keeping the book in place. This balance of forces results in a state of no motion, meaning the book doesn't accelerate, it doesn't move. This is a great example of how the absence of motion can teach us a lot about the forces around us. Even though we can't see it, forces are at play, but because they balance each other out, no motion occurs. And as a result, no acceleration takes place. In summary, when an object is at rest, like the book on the table, it is in a state of force equilibrium. No acceleration happens and the concept of inertia is in action. This simple example may seem trivial, but it's fundamental to understanding motion, or the lack of it, in our world. In the next part, we'll talk about how to identify acceleration in more dynamic scenarios and understand how it manifests in our daily lives. Stay with me. Now let's take this a step further and talk about balanced forces. Imagine you're standing in front of a solid wall, using all your strength to push against it. You're pushing as hard as you can, but the wall doesn't move. Why? Because the forces acting in this scenario are perfectly balanced. When you push against the wall, you exert a force on it. But at the same time, the wall pushes back on you with an equal amount of force. The result? These forces cancel each other out and there's no movement, which means no acceleration occurs. This is a classic example of Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The harder you push, the harder the wall pushes back. The forces are balanced and as a result, nothing moves. In situations like this, even though you're applying force, no acceleration takes place because the forces are equal and opposite. The net force, that is, the total force acting on the system, is zero. And when the net force is zero, the object, in this case the wall, doesn't move. This principle of balanced forces applies not just when pushing walls, but in many situations in our daily lives. Anytime you see an object not moving despite force being applied to it, there's a good chance the forces are balanced. So, next time you find yourself pushing on something that refuses to move, remember, it's not that you're not strong enough. It's simply that the forces are evenly matched, resulting in no motion. In the next part, we'll look at what happens when forces are unbalanced and how that leads to acceleration. Stay tuned. Now let's dive into a concept that might seem a bit tricky at first: circular motion at constant speed. Imagine a car driving on a perfectly circular racetrack. The car's speed is steady, it's moving at, let's say, 60 kilometers per hour. You might be thinking, isn't this car accelerating since it's constantly changing direction? Well, not exactly. Here's what's happening. While the car is indeed moving along the circular path, its speed, that is, how fast it's covering distance, is not changing. It's maintaining a constant speed of 60 kilometers per hour. However, acceleration doesn't just mean a change in speed. In this case, it's all about the change in direction. In circular motion, even though the car's speed is constant, its velocity is changing because velocity includes both speed and direction. So, as the car turns along the curve, it's constantly changing direction, which means its velocity is changing. That's why we say the car experiences centripetal acceleration. This type of acceleration is directed toward the center of the circular path, keeping the car moving in a curve. But here's the key: the car is not accelerating in the sense that its speed is increasing or decreasing. The magnitude of its speed remains constant, 60 kilometers per hour. What's changing is the direction of the velocity. So, while it's technically accelerating due to the change in direction, we're not seeing any change in the car's actual speed. This concept is crucial in understanding how objects move in circular paths, whether it's a car on a racetrack or planets orbiting around a star. As long as the speed stays constant, there's no change in the rate at which the object is moving, but because the direction changes, we still have acceleration to consider. In everyday terms, it's like riding a merry-go-round. You might be moving at a steady pace, but because you're constantly turning, your direction is changing, giving you a sensation of motion even though your speed is stable. In the next part, we'll take this concept further and discuss what happens when an object's speed and direction change. Stay tuned. Let's now talk about a fascinating concept in physics: free fall, or what happens when an object is falling solely under the influence of gravity. To help us understand this better, imagine an apple falling from a tree. In a normal situation on Earth, the apple would encounter air resistance as it falls, which would affect its acceleration. But for now, let's remove that air resistance entirely and think about what would happen if the apple were falling in a vacuum, like in space or a controlled environment without any air. In this scenario, the apple would be in free fall. The only force acting on it is gravity, and that force causes it to accelerate toward the ground. This acceleration due to gravity is constant, about 9.8 meters per second squared on Earth. That means the apple's velocity is increasing by 9.8 meters per second every second as it falls. Now you might wonder, what about air resistance? Well, when we talk about free fall in a vacuum, there's no air resistance to slow the apple down. As a result, the apple continues to accelerate at a constant rate until it hits the ground or reaches terminal velocity. If we imagine this situation in an environment with no air, like outer space, the apple would just keep accelerating indefinitely under the influence of gravity until it encounters another force, such as a surface or another object. However, in reality, objects falling through Earth's atmosphere eventually reach what we call terminal velocity. This happens when the force of air resistance equals the force of gravity, causing the object to stop accelerating and fall at a constant speed. But in a vacuum, since there's no air resistance, the apple never reaches this terminal velocity. It keeps accelerating due to gravity alone. This example shows how different forces, or the lack of them, impact how objects move. It also highlights the idea of constant acceleration in free fall when air resistance isn't a factor. So, whether it's an apple falling from a tree or an astronaut dropping a tool in space, the principles remain the same. Gravity accelerates objects downward, and without resistance they continue to gain speed. In the next part, we'll dive into a scenario where both air resistance and gravity come into play. Stay tuned. Let's delve into an important aspect of motion: the effects of friction and air resistance on a moving vehicle. Imagine a car driving down a road at a steady speed. When the driver applies the brakes, the car begins to slow down. In this scenario, the vehicle is experiencing a change in velocity, which means it's undergoing acceleration. But it's crucial to understand that this acceleration can actually be negative. Negative acceleration, often referred to as deceleration, occurs when an object slows down. So, when the car is braking, it's effectively reducing its speed due to the force of friction between the tires and the road surface, as well as the resistance created by the air around it. This frictional force acts in the opposite direction to the car's motion, causing the vehicle to decelerate. Now, let's consider a situation where the car is sliding along the road after the brakes have been applied. During this slide, the car might maintain a constant speed for a brief moment. In this case, even though the car is still in motion, it is not accelerating because its velocity remains unchanged. The forces acting on the car, namely the friction and air resistance, are in balance with the forward momentum of the vehicle, resulting in a net acceleration of zero. This distinction is important. When a car is braking and slowing down, it is accelerating negatively due to the deceleration from friction and air resistance. However, when it glides at a constant speed, despite being on a slippery surface, it is no longer accelerating as there's no change in velocity. Understanding these concepts helps clarify how forces interact in our daily lives, particularly in driving scenarios. The effects of friction and air resistance are critical for controlling a vehicle's speed and ensuring safety on the road. In the next section, we'll explore how these forces come into play in different environments. Stay tuned. Let's explore a fascinating scenario involving motion. Imagine you're traveling in a train that is moving at a constant speed along its tracks. While you're comfortably seated, you decide to toss a ball straight up into the air. As the ball rises and falls back into your hand, an intriguing phenomenon occurs that highlights the principles of motion. Inside the train, while you throw the ball vertically, it may seem like it's accelerating upwards and then downwards due to the influence of gravity. However, in the context of horizontal motion, something quite interesting is happening. The ball is not accelerating in the horizontal direction. This is because the train is moving at a constant speed. To understand this better, let's consider the frame of reference. From your perspective inside the train, you're not aware of the train's movement. You and the ball are both moving together at the same constant speed. Thus, when you toss the ball upwards, it travels up and down without any change in its horizontal motion relative to you. This scenario illustrates an essential concept in physics. While the ball experiences vertical acceleration due to gravity, it maintains a constant horizontal velocity equal to that of the train. Therefore, as the train continues its journey at a steady pace, the ball returns to your hand without any lateral displacement. This example beautifully demonstrates the difference between vertical and horizontal acceleration and how the principles of motion apply differently in various frames of reference. The fact that you can perceive the ball's motion without noticing the train's speed emphasizes how our experiences can vary based on perspective. In our next segment, we'll continue to unravel more fascinating aspects of motion. Stay tuned for more insights. As we reach the end of our journey through the fascinating world of motion and acceleration, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. We've uncovered some essential principles that govern not only how objects move but also how we perceive that motion in our everyday lives. Firstly, we explored the idea that motion doesn't always equate to acceleration. This can be counterintuitive at first, but as we saw in examples like the car moving at a constant speed or the ball inside the moving train, an object can be in motion without experiencing acceleration. When an object maintains a constant velocity, whether it's moving in a straight line or even in a circular path, it's not accelerating. This is because acceleration, as we've defined, is a change in velocity, not the act of moving itself. We also explored scenarios where an object is at rest, like the book on the table or the balance forces when you push against a wall. In these cases, the acceleration is zero because the velocity doesn't change. These examples help illustrate the concept of equilibrium, where forces cancel each other out, leaving the object stationary and with no acceleration. But then, we encountered situations where acceleration does play a crucial role, like objects in free fall or a car braking on the road. Here we saw how acceleration can either increase or decrease an object's speed, and how external forces such as gravity or friction influence this change. This helps us grasp the significance of understanding acceleration not just in terms of speeding up, but also slowing down or even maintaining a steady rate of speed. By understanding the distinction between movement and acceleration, we gain deeper insights into how forces interact with the objects around us. Whether it's a vehicle traveling on the road, an object in free fall, or simply an everyday scenario like balancing forces, these concepts are fundamental to understanding the world through the lens of physics. So, what does all this mean for us in practical terms? It means we can better predict and analyze the movements of objects, from the smallest particles to the largest celestial bodies. It enhances our ability to think critically about the physical interactions happening every day, whether we're engineering new technologies or simply observing the natural world. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of motion and acceleration. Remember, understanding these core concepts opens the door to a greater understanding of physics and the forces that shape our universe. Stay curious, keep asking questions, and until next time, keep exploring the incredible world of science. If this video helped you better understand the concepts of motion and acceleration, don't forget to show your support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming content. And of course, drop your questions and suggestions in the comments. I'm always keeping an eye out. Stay curious, and I'll see you in our next scientific exploration.